personal narrative, disaster narratives, and I'm so glad that Danielle invoked that because I'm going to do more in this piece. The piece is called Disaster Narratives, Emergent Seas, Performing Loss, Identity, and Resistance. And I realized that that Phyllis I hadn't been aware of scholarship, of publication in a while, and had been focused mostly on teaching. And I was really happy to be able to engage with this manuscript, to work with her, to work with Linda, and especially to just get to know Phyllis a little bit more, who by then I realized had been so incredibly influential with many, many undergraduate and graduate students, so many master's students who went on to get PhDs and teach in programs all across the country. So, those genealogies, we all love those genealogies, and I just was connecting dots at that moment that I hadn't really been able to do before. One of my most fulfilling aspects of the time with TPQ was developing relationships with authors, brand new authors, brand new PhDs, or graduate students who were doing some of their first publishing, established artist scholars that I had met but didn't really know, as well as artist scholars who I knew very well, and who were maybe going in new directions. So being able to publish what I think might have been Phyllis's last publication means a lot to me. In this piece, Phyllis collected over 500 personal narratives concerning disasters spanning over 100 years. So basically from around 1900 flood, and then the San Francisco earthquake, 1906, up through Katrina. So these were narratives that maybe were originally oral and then got recorded. Some of them were written kinds of entries, but wide spanning, over 500. And she and Linda analyzed these to uncover what might constitute a genre of disaster narrative and further explore ethno-theater types of performances, like playback theater and others, of these kinds of disaster narratives as an additional sense-making experience for communities. Both communities that went through the disaster itself and making those experiences known to people outside who may not have directly experienced it. So the timing of this panel reflecting on her life and her legacy and that particular article in this time of COVID that we're all dealing with, just everything sort of seems to come together. And so I'd like to share some of the writing because it resonates particularly well with our new collective, personal, and disparate experiences of the COVID-19 pandemic and the numerous disaster narratives that have emerged over the past nearly 2 years and will continue to emerge, I think, for quite a long time to come. In particular, Phyllis and Linda note the complex, quote, ethical stances and social commentaries that are brought into high relief by the stories told and the stories that are covered up, and the uncovering of numerous inequities that we're all far too aware of. So this article, I think, is prescient, actually, in many ways. It was published in 2012, and it's really prescient in many ways. This part refers to the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. Quote, other personal accounts may be silenced by political forces of the times, the ghosts of their potential critiques surfacing only with the writing of new histories. Today, with immediate, on-the-spot, and in-depth news reporting, the masking of a disaster's politically controversial aspects becomes more difficult than, for example, the silencing of geologists by business proponents after San Francisco's 1906 earthquake. End quote. And then they go on a little bit, but then contrast that with 9/11 and some Katrina narratives. Quote, yet significant questions remain regarding who gets to tell their stories, whose faces appear most frequently on broadcasts and talk shows, and what video images recur on television and online. And then I could keep quoting a bunch from this article, but I'm just going to read the conclusion, because again, I think it bears suggest that their draw is more complex. They ask us as listeners/audiences to become more reflexive. They build community among us, and they offer us hard-won hope. They show us what is personal and absent in the languages of public issues, policies, and broad population studies. The sheer number of national and global disasters in the past 100 years, together with implications of increasing disasters due to climate change and growing political unrest, tell us the time to address disaster stories through more nuanced performance knowledge and skills has come. To tell and to participate in the telling through performing and bearing witness is to further the struggle to resist annihilation, to enhance and to critique community memory, and always to honor those who suffered, those who cannot speak, and those who can never come home. So I hope that we kind of look at this article again in the context of what we're all living through right now, because I found it so interesting to revisit it with how specific and localized a lot of the disasters tend to be, and we know this. I mean, we can name 1,000 examples over the last several years in terms of, particular area of flooding, particular area of wildfire, particular area of, you name it. But what we got going on right now is national and worldwide, and we're all, processing in different ways. So I hope that I think it was quite prescient. I hope we also continue to look at Phyllis's other contributions to performance studies, and certainly based on what we've heard so far, I know that her life and her legacy will live on. And I'm so glad that I was able to participate in this. So, Carlin?
Hi, everybody. This is, I think I was like sharing, so one, I do not have an acoustic song prepared. I was sharing with somebody that this is my first NCA since Dallas, so it is like really good to be back, and I find myself really kind of like ping-ponging between extremes, with like celebrating the joy. Like I'm getting lunch in a few hours with somebody that I haven't seen in several years. I am like seeing folks that I haven't seen in many years, and so I'm just like really in like a state of celebration, and I'm just like really happy to be seeing the people that I care deeply about. I am also experiencing its twin, right, of just like loss and grief of two really huge giants in the discipline of performance studies. So this is my second memorial panel that I've attended in the last like 12 hours. And so I just, certainly am not gonna like bust out in song, but I do want to just highlight the visionary that Phyllis was, not just for the geographic region of the Midwest or the state of Iowa or like a specific program or a specific theater, but the impact that she has had on the field, I believe, is really central to what many of us do in the discipline of performance studies. And, just incredibly central in the founding of the Interpreters Theater, which, that is on the map, right, in so many different ways. And so her commitment to student-centered performance practice, I believe, is like one of the most like sacred, enduring qualities of performance studies, and I really do believe that is felt in the discipline. And certainly not the only one. She's not the only one who does or who did that, but really somebody that I hold dear in my heart and in my scholarship and in my commitment to student-centered performance practice. And so I'm like really grateful to see all of y'all here today, and I'm excited to chat with you later more about this.
I'm John Fritsch. I met Phyllis a bit differently than many of you. I came into the University of Northern Iowa and was the department head of communications, what at that time was communication studies. So the way I first met Phyllis was when she walked into my office and sat down. And when one of the senior people in the department would come in as a new department head, I was quite nervous. But I recall many things about Phyllis. One is a story she told. As a department head, this was a really unnerving story. It was the story of how when she tried to negotiate her contract at the University of Northern Iowa when she first came, she was told they would not negotiate because she was a single woman and did not have a family to support. As a department head, I immediately went, this sounds like a lawsuit, you know. But that wasn't really Phyllis's point through it. It was more of a story of this is the way the world was, and really trying to help me understand part of what she had seen at the university. And to go from there. The three things that I think about Phyllis when I think about what she meant to me. My area of research is rhetorical theory, rhetorical criticism, so it diverges quickly from where she's at. But our interests overlapped. But what strikes me, and what I found quickly, is while we had some of the same interests, family, place, we approached them differently. And so what it became was a place where we connected, not based on our scholarship, but on common interests. The first thing that really struck me about Phyllis is, as I listened to you all, is she really lived what she was interested in researching. Family was critically important to Phyllis. The number of times that she and I talked about Chuck, Laura, and Sarah, and her parents in Kirksville, that was where our conversations often started, about her family, what they meant to her, and how she was trying to care for her family. The second way that played out was a keen interest in my family as well. So it wasn't just about her, it was caring. I had a nephew who went through some very difficult times, and she was one of the first people in my office to go, how's he doing? Is there anything I can do to help? The second thing is an interesting place. We were both fascinated intellectually by the concept of place, the notion of what constitutes place, how do we define place, and when the last conversation she and I were having was one of our dreams was to create a center for the study of place at the University of Northern Iowa. And in her retirement, I was like, would you be interested in doing this? But her retirement was cut far too short. The third thing about Phyllis that I think about is just her grace. As a senior member of the department, when I would talk to her about an idea I was having, I could tell by her face pretty quickly whether it was resonating or not. But she was very gracious in how she would tactfully explain to me that I might not be going down the right path. The other thing I remember is we were having trouble covering courses in the department once, and she wanted me to teach one of her courses. And it quickly became apparent that it was not going to be the same course. Right? I don't have the skill set that she has, different interests. It'd be the same title, some of the same objectives. She was very helpful in getting me started. Then was kind of, not that I was on my own, but the grace to explore my interests in the class rather than her interests were something that really struck me right away. As other folks came into the department, that is something that struck me as they entered the department as well, is the way Phyllis was willing to create space for them to be themselves. And I think that is one of the strongest praises that we can give to a single faculty member in a department. So she was really, in my mind, a model faculty member, a model colleague, and just a great human being.
So I've had the good fortune to know Phyllis for about 15 years, both when I was a student in the department and then later as her colleague. But I had the particularly good fortune of being her next door neighbor to her office. So I got to see a lot of Phyllis when I come in. And so in the spirit of Phyllis's work, I just wanted to share a story. Getting ready to go up for tenure was very stressful for me. I remember walking up to my office door just as Phyllis was walking out of hers, and she asked how I was doing, like between sips of like the obscenely large coffee that was keeping me upright at the time. I gave her a real honest answer. we had our second child on the way, and as you can imagine, like the thought of having 2 kids and a mortgage and having to like make a little binder and send it out to be critiqued and find out if you have a job is pretty stressful right now. And Phyllis listened and she asked some questions and she heard my story, and then she shared a bit of her own story. She talked about how at the start of her career, she looked back and recognized that she was spending just an overwhelming amount of her waking hours working, and thinking about work and a little stressed about work, and how when she had her own children, she made a decision to strike a different balance that let her be there for those relationships that mattered the most to her, and how at the end of her career, looking back, she never regretted that change. And it was this amazing, like, gentle, graceful, and indirect advice that I think that Phyllis was so good at giving. And I know that Phyllis has had major and long-lasting impacts on the legacy and development of moral interpretive performance studies that pretty much everybody in this room is more qualified than I am to explain. But there's another piece of her legacy that I think that this kind of highlights. When Danielle and I decided that we wanted to go back to the department, and you and I, a big part of the draw for us was our own lived experiences of it being a place where faculty took the time to get to know students and cared about them as whole people. And I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years in particular thinking about how that isn't the kind of culture that happens by accident. It happens when people care enough to listen, to ask questions, to hear your story, and share their own. And I think over time I've recognized what a major role Phyllis played in building that culture in our department. I think that's a part of her legacy that's worth remembering and celebrating.
Thank you, Ryan. This is really fun for me. I didn't plan this. I really, I love Phyllis. She's had a profound impact on my life. And this is the first time I've had the space since she's passed to sort of remember with others. I attended her funeral on YouTube, right? So thank you so much for being part of this space. And as I heard the stories, we know that stories are contagious. It started bringing up all these memories. For me, Phyllis was this person who I felt believed in me. I had a weird idea for a thesis project that I was bringing to different faculty members, and they were kind of like, okay, Danielle, that doesn't quite make sense. Keep working on it. And I went and I brought the idea to Phyllis, and she was like, oh, I get it. Here's what we need to do. Right? And I think it was so empowering for me to feel like she listened and she understood and she could hear my vision. And then was willing to work with me to make my vision happen. And it was such an important moment for me to sort of feel like I had someone that was there with me. When I came back to UNI as a faculty member, there was a class that she was teaching where she was doing a toxic tour and kind of talking about, we have lots of floods in Cedar Falls and the floods and climate change and all of that work, and I'm very interested in and invested in conversations around climate change and local work around that. And all the students were like, this is such a good class, Danielle. Oh my gosh. Like, listen to all these things that Phyllis is doing. I was like, Phyllis, like, you have to teach me how to do this. She's like, well, here's my syllabus. And I looked at it and I was like, explain to me. Because her syllabus was wonderful. But I was like, I don't know how you moved from like all these little pieces in order to create her classes. She moved people through stories as like a long storied experience. And the syllabus just doesn't quite capture the art that was her teaching. And then of course, she was such a wonderful mentor to me as I started a family of my own. She, lectured me on like working too much and needing to, take breaks, and that it's in your relationship with people too, that like that's how you learn to then do the scholarship that matters. And I'm just so grateful for her. So today I want to end, I will open it up for others to share too, but I want to end with a piece that Phyllis wrote. So in 1975, when she was at SIU, she and Judy Jordan directed a show about the challenges of teaching. Fun fact, Karen Mitchell was also in the show. And here is a short section from it. Teaching isn't like running a grocery store or filling teeth or selling insurance. Maybe it's more like farming than anything else. Every year there's a new crop. Success means the crop grew and flourished, and failure means it didn't. The growing season is grueling, back-breaking work. Teachers and farmers don't rest much over weekends as others do, but once a year during the off-season. There are good years and bad years. There are years when the seed is right, the soil is perfect, the rain's on time, and the farmer can do no wrong. Other years, everything the farmer does is wrong. What year are we in? Both farmers and teachers learn to accept these cycles, even exploit them. One perseveres. Last year's mistakes inspire this year's experiments, which in turn yield next year's wisdom. So, one grows with the growing, finds renewal in the renewed. Perhaps that's why teachers and farmers live longer than other people do. It's a good life, after all. Phyllis had a good life. And I open it up for anyone else to share their stories. We have about 15 minutes.
I'll share. So it was coming back to you and I. But it seems like everyone has. But it was kind of interesting because being at the Interpreters Theater, I kept trying to do this deep dive as far as how back can we go, how did this start. Phyllis started the Interpreters Theater with Words and Voices before 1976. And one of the things I kept meaning to do, and I still regret it, of course, I kept wanting to set up a meeting where we can have lunch and just chat about it all. Because I noticed, especially with so many folks like retiring from our department, how are we going to remember all these stories that kind of came with the place as well. That is definitely one thing that I feel regret for, is never setting up that meeting. And it's given me the onus to try to make sure I reach out faster to the people that I respect and admire a lot. So, while I regret it, it also taught me something that I can then take forward with me as well.
So I was an undergraduate at the University of Northern Iowa from 92 to 96, and this was at a time when I think Phyllis was really invested in writing her edited book. And so I didn't get a chance to take a course with her. I was also a theater major, so I was just sort of dipping in and out of comm studies. And I worked mostly with Karen Mitchell. But I encountered Dr. Carlin, that's how I still think of her, in the hallways, and I found her to be lovely and also intimidating. And I mostly met her once I went to graduate school on the page. And reading those stories that were so rooted in Iowa, where I grew up, was really amazing. You know, when you're from the Midwest, it's hard to find literature and work that speaks to your experience. It's not New York, you know. And so it was refreshing, it was deeply rewarding, but I think the best thing that happened was I happened to be the planner for Central States the year that Phyllis retired. And so I got to put together her tribute panel, her retirement panel, and really interact with her. And she was so, as everyone has said, just lovely and wonderful. And all of the things that people had to say about her were incredible. And it's a loss for our field, and I think she embodied the good work and the good life in so many ways, and thank you all for sharing your stories as well. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm a little outside here too. I'm a quantitative group communication scholar.
Woo!
Woo! But I did my master's at Northern Iowa from 2008 to 2010 and took a couple classes with Phyllis, and I grew up on a dairy farm in Minnesota. And so we very quickly connected. And, you know, I went on, got my PhD from North Dakota State, studied family farm conflict, all quantitative. And I remember Phyllis in the back of my head popping up going, well, what's their story? Like, what's their story? I'm like, well, I'm getting the stats. That's the easy part. And I think back now, you know, just recently getting tenure, finishing up a USDA grant looking at family farm stories around mental health, around stress, and kind of the whole farm crisis recently. And I'm sitting here and going, now I have a chance to continue Phyllis's story. And I'm just bummed she won't be here to help with it, but it's wonderful to know that I can have a piece of helping her move forward.
I also wanted to just add to Heidi's point about Phyllis and Linda Cartoller's essay. I'm going to make a pitch at the business meeting about nominating some stuff for performance studies for the Wilbert Award, and that sounds like such a great piece to put forward. So I think we should seriously consider that, because it is just, it fits those criteria, being foundational and standing the test of time.
That's a great idea.
Apparently it's kind of embedded in this discussion, but I'll make she was wicked smart. You know, there was never a time when I was visiting with her where I was like, I always knew it was somebody much smarter than I was when I was visiting.
And I suppose we probably should have let folks know too, we are recording it to give actually a copy to her husband Chuck. Has asked for a copy for this, of this.
That's great.
Well, thank you, everyone. I invite you to sort of, maybe less formally, continue to share. And, you know, I also just think about, you know, this is specifically, you know, honoring Phyllis, but I also think that it touches on how important I think our work is to each other. And that sometimes, you know, especially, it's been a tough couple of years, right? To kind of, that we don't always know in the moment the effects of our work, and so to kind of hold that with you as well. So thank you so much. Thank you for creating this space together to remember and share and tell. So have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I go there mine for you can have that, I come back. They almost got it, yeah.